The shovel bit into earth that had seen nothing but weeds and dust for 20 years, and Elena Morales knew with absolute certainty that this land would either save her life or destroy it. She had been working since dawn, her cotton dress already clinging to her back with sweat despite the early hour, her dark hair escaping its braid in damp tendrils around her face. The spring of 1878 had brought unexpected rain to this corner of Texas, just north of San Antonio, and the soil here near the creek bed was rich and dark in a way that made her hands ache with possibility. She had no legal claim to this abandoned plot, no papers that said she could turn over this earth and press seeds into its depths. But desperation had a way of making a woman bold. Her husband had been dead for 3 months. Pneumonia had taken Miguel quickly, his lungs filling with fluid in the span of a week, leaving Elena alone with $2 to her name and a rented room she could no longer afford. She was 23 years old, alone in a world that had little use for widows without family or means. The landlady had given her until the end of the month, and Elena had walked the streets of San Antonio looking for work, finding nothing but propositions that made her stomach turn and offers that would have stripped away what remained of her dignity. Then she had remembered this place. She and Miguel had passed it once on their way to his cousin's ranch, and he had commented on what a waste it was, all this good bottomland going to nothing. The old homesteader who had claimed it had died without heirs, Miguel had heard, and the property had reverted to some bank back east. No one had touched it since. No one wanted land this far from town, too isolated to be convenient, too small to run cattle on properly. But for a garden, for vegetables she could sell in the market, for a chance to keep herself fed and housed, it might be exactly enough. She had been coming here for 2 weeks now, walking the 5 miles from town before first light, working until the sun grew too fierce, then walking back. She had started in the corner nearest the creek, clearing brush and rocks, turning over soil that fought her with every thrust of the borrowed shovel. Her hands had blistered and bled, then hardened into calluses. Her shoulders burned with constant ache. But rows were beginning to take shape, neat lines that spoke of order and purpose, and she had planted the first seeds yesterday: tomatoes, beans, squash. She had spent her last $1.50 on those seeds, betting everything on the hope that she could make something grow. The sun was climbing higher now, turning the April morning warm and bright. Elena straightened, pressing both hands to the small of her back, and surveyed her work. 6 more rows cleared, ready for planting. If she could get corn in today and maybe the peppers, she would be well started. In 3 months, perhaps less, she would have vegetables to sell. In 3 months, she could pay her rent and buy more seeds, and maybe, just maybe, begin to build something resembling a life. She did not hear the horse until it was nearly upon her. The animal's hooves made almost no sound in the soft earth, and when the shadow fell across her newly turned rows, Elena gasped and spun, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man on horseback sat easy in his saddle, his hat tilted back enough that she could see his face clearly. He was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with the weathered tan of someone who lived his life outdoors. His eyes were a startling blue-green, the color of the shallow parts of the creek, and they were fixed on her with an expression she could not quite read. "Morning," he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, with a slight drawl that marked him as native to this part of Texas. "I do not mean to startle you." Elena's Spanish was her first language, but she had learned English well enough during her 5 years in San Antonio. She swallowed hard, very aware that she was alone out here, miles from help, with a strange man and no protection beyond the shovel in her hands. "Good morning," she managed. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He looked past her at the turned earth, the neat rows, the small sack of seeds sitting carefully on a flat rock to keep them out of the dirt. His gaze lingered there for a long moment, then came back to her face. "You're planting a garden," he observed. It was not a question, but Elena found herself nodding anyway. "Yes. This is good land for it," he said. "Close to water, good drainage, Catches the morning sun, but gets some shade from those cottonwoods in the afternoon. He gestured toward the trees that lined the creek. You know your business. She did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. Her fingers tightened on the shovel handle. The man seemed to notice, and something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that might have been understanding. I am not here to cause you trouble, he said. My name is James Hollister. My ranch is about 3 miles west of here. I was riding out to check on some fencing when I saw you. He paused. I have seen you before, I think, at the market in town. You sold tamales from a basket. Elena remembered. That had been 2 months ago, just after Miguel died, when she had tried to make money cooking. She had sold exactly 6 tamales before the woman who owned the cafe had run her off, accusing her of stealing customers. I remember, she said quietly. James Hollister nodded slowly. Those were the best tamales I've ever eaten, he said. I told my ranch hands about them for a week. He shifted in his saddle, and his horse danced sideways a step before settling. May I ask your name? She hesitated. Giving her name felt like giving something away, some small piece of herself. But rudeness would gain her nothing, and this man had been nothing but courteous. Elena Morales, she said. Mrs. Morales, he acknowledged, and she saw his gaze drop briefly to her left hand, where she still wore Miguel's ring. It was too large for her finger, meant for him, not for her, but she had wrapped thread around the band to make it fit. It was all she had left of him. I do not mean to pry, but may I ask who you are planting this garden for, the owner of this land? Elena felt her stomach drop. She had known this moment might come, had rehearsed in her head what she would say, but now that it was here, the words felt flimsy and insufficient. I am planting it for myself, she said, lifting her chin. I know this is not my land. I know I have no right to be here, but no one else is using it, and I need to grow food, and I thought that perhaps no one would mind if I just used this small corner. I am not harming anything. I will take only what I plant. James Hollister was quiet for a moment, studying her. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze, to not look away. Even though her heart was beating so hard she felt dizzy with it. Finally, he said, You are right that no one has been using it. The bank back in Philadelphia owns it, has for about 4 years now. They have been trying to sell it, but no one wants to buy land this far from town, too isolated for most folks' taste. Elena nodded stiffly. She had guessed something like that. I will leave if you wish, she said, but I've already planted seeds in those rows. If I could just tend them until they produce, I would pay the bank a share of what I sell. It seems only fair. He tilted his head slightly, still watching her with that measuring gaze. How much of a share? She had not expected him to actually negotiate. She had expected him to tell her to get off the land and never come back. Half, she said, the word rushing out. I would give them half? That is more than fair, James said. That is generous. He swung down from his horse in one smooth motion, landing lightly on his feet. He was tall, she realized, several inches over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, rangy build of a man who worked hard for his living. He wore working clothes, denim trousers, and a simple cotton shirt with a vest, all of it clean but worn. His boots were good quality but scuffed. Mrs. Morales, I have a question for you if you will permit me. Elena took a half step back, maintaining the distance between them. What question? Why are you really doing this? He asked. His tone was not unkind, but there was a directness to it that demanded honesty. Planting a garden on land that is not yours, walking all the way out here from town every day, working yourself near to exhaustion, what happened that brought you to this? For a moment, Elena considered lying, but what would be the point? He could see her situation clearly enough written in her calloused hands and her worn dress, and the desperation that must show in her face no matter how hard she tried to hide it. My husband died 3 months ago, she said. I have no family here, no means of support. I have been looking for work, but there is nothing. I thought if I could grow vegetables, I could sell them and keep myself fed. That is all. I am just trying to survive. Something flickered in James Hollister's eyes, something that looked almost like pain. I am sorry for your loss, he said quietly. That is a hard thing to bear alone. Thank you, Elena said, because what else was there to say? She was tired of sympathy, tired of the pitying looks people gave her when they learned she was widowed, tired of the way that pity never translated into actual help. She turned back toward her rows, toward the work that at least gave her purpose. If you have come to tell me I must leave, then I will leave. But if you will permit me just a few more days, I would like to finish planting what seeds I have. It would be a waste otherwise. Mrs. Morales, James said, and there was something in his voice that made her turn back. I did not ride out here to run you off. I rode out here because I saw you and wanted to know what you were doing. Now that I know, I want to help. Elena stared at him. Help? This bank, the one that owns this land, he said. I know the man who handles their properties out here. His name is Gerald Simmons, has an office in San Antonio. I could talk to him, explain your situation. Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement where you could lease this plot legally. That way you would not have to worry about someone coming along and running you off. And the bank would get some income from land that is just sitting idle. It was more than she had dared to hope for. And precisely because of that, Elena found herself suspicious. Why would you do that? She asked. You do not know me. Why would you help me? James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost hesitant. My mother was widowed when I was 16, he said. My father died of a fever, left her alone with 3 children and a small ranch that was barely getting by. I watched her work herself near to death trying to keep us fed and housed. I watched people turn away from her when she asked for help, watched them offer her charity that came with strings attached, watched them try to take advantage of her because she was alone and vulnerable. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in her situation, I would do it. No strings, no conditions, just help, because it is the right thing to do. Elena searched his face for signs of deception, for the catch that surely must be hidden in such an offer, but James Hollister's gaze was steady and clear, and she saw nothing in it but sincerity. Still, she had learned to be cautious. What would this lease cost? She asked. I have almost no money. I could not pay much. We would work that out with Simmons, James said. Maybe a percentage of your crop, like you suggested. Or maybe just a nominal fee, $1 a year, or something symbolic. The point is not to make money off you, Mrs. Morales. The point is to give you legal standing so you can do this work without fear. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But experience had taught her that kindness from strange men rarely came without a price. I do not understand why you would do this for me, she said again. We are strangers. We are neighbors, James corrected gently, and neighbors help each other. That is how people survive out here. He glanced at the sun, now high overhead, then back at her. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. I am a stranger, and you are alone, and the world has not been kind to you. I understand that. But I am making you an honest offer of help, and I swear to you on my honor that there is nothing else behind it. I will talk to Simmons, see what can be arranged, and if it comes to nothing, then you have lost nothing. But if it works, you would have legal claim to this land and could plant your garden without worry. Is that not worth a conversation? Elena thought of the landlady's tight-lipped impatience, the way she had been counting down the days until Elena's rent was due. She thought of the seeds in her bag, the rows she had already planted, the gamble she had already taken. She thought of Miguel, who had always told her to trust her instincts about people, and her instincts were telling her that James Hollister meant what he said. All right, she said finally, if you wish to speak to this Mr. Simmons, I will not stop you, but I can make no promises about payment until I know what he would ask. Fair enough, James said. He gathered his horse's reins, preparing to mount again, but he paused, one foot in the stirrup, and looked back at her. Are you out here every day? Yes, Elena said. I come at dawn and work until midday, then walk back to town. That is a long walk, James observed. 10 miles round trip in addition to all this labor. You must be exhausted." She was bone deep and constantly, but she merely shrugged. "It is necessary." James nodded slowly. "I am going to ride into town today, talk to Simmons. If he is agreeable, I will come back tomorrow and let you know what he says. Would that be all right?" "Yes," Elena said. "Thank you." He swung up into the saddle, settling himself with practiced ease. For a moment he just sat there, looking down at her turned earth and her neat rows. And there was something in his expression that Elena could not quite name, something warm and almost sad at the same time. "You have done good work here," he said. "It would be a shame to let it go to waste." Then he touched his hat brim to her, a small gesture of respect, and turned his horse back toward the west. Elena watched him ride away until he disappeared over the low rise. Then she turned back to her garden and picked up her shovel. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she realized she had been holding herself tense the entire conversation, ready to run or fight if necessary. But James Hollister had been nothing but kind, and now there was a small, fragile hope growing in her chest alongside the fear. She worked through the rest of the morning with renewed energy, getting the corn planted and half the peppers before the heat drove her back toward town. As she walked, she replayed the conversation in her mind, examining every word, every gesture, looking for the trap she was sure must be there. But no matter how many times she reviewed it, she could find nothing but straightforward kindness. It frightened her almost more than cruelty would have, because kindness made you hope, and hope could break your heart worse than anything. The next morning, Elena arrived at the land just as the sun was breaking over the horizon. She had barely slept, her mind churning with possibilities and worries in equal measure. What if James Hollister had been lying? What if he had gone to this Simmons man and told him to run her off? What if she arrived today to find the sheriff waiting, ready to arrest her for trespassing? She had almost convinced herself not to come, to cut her losses and try something else, anything else. But she had nowhere else to go and nothing else to try, so she had gathered her tools and made the long walk in the pre-dawn darkness. No one was waiting for her. The land lay quiet and undisturbed, her rows exactly as she had left them, the small sack of remaining seeds still sitting on its rock. Elena let out a breath she had not known she was holding and set to work on the peppers. She had 4 rows left to plant, and if she could finish them today, she would have done everything she could with the seeds she had. After that, it would just be a matter of tending and watering and praying that the weather held. She had been working for perhaps 2 hours when she heard hoofbeats again. This time she was ready, straightening slowly and shading her eyes against the climbing sun. James Hollister rode toward her at an easy lope, but today he was not alone. Another man rode beside him, older and heavier, dressed in a dark suit that looked absurdly formal out here in the middle of nowhere. Elena's heart sank. The suit meant official business, probably bad news. The 2 men reined in a few yards from her, and James dismounted immediately. The older man took a moment longer, climbing down from his horse with the careful movements of someone who did not ride often or particularly well. James turned to Elena, and his expression was difficult to read. "Mrs. Morales," he said. "This is Mr. Gerald Simmons. He handles property sales and leases for the Philadelphia Bank and Trust." Gerald Simmons was perhaps 50, with thinning gray hair and spectacles that caught the light when he moved his head. He looked at Elena with the assessing gaze of a man who spent his life evaluating value and risk. "Mrs. Morales," he said, nodding. "Mr. Hollister has told me about your situation." Elena clasped her hands in front of her to keep them from shaking. "Yes, sir." Simmons walked past her, studying the turned earth, the planted rows, the neat edges she had dug. He bent down, examining the soil, then straightened and looked toward the creek. "You have been working hard," he said. It was a statement, not a question. "How long have you been at this?" 2 weeks, Elena said. "I know I had no right to use this land, sir. I can leave if you wish. But if I could tend what I have already planted, I would happily give half of what I grow to the bank, or more, if that is what you require." Simmons turned back to her, his expression still unreadable. Mr. Hollister tells me you are a widow, that you are trying to support yourself. Yes, sir? And that you have no family, no other means. No, sir. He was quiet for a long moment, and Elena felt the weight of that silence like a physical thing. Finally, Simmons looked at James, then back at her. Mrs. Morales, the bank has been trying to sell this property for 4 years without success. It is too small and too isolated for most buyers, and maintaining the listing costs more than the land is worth. Frankly, the bank would be happy to be rid of it. Elena's throat tightened. You want me to leave? No, Simmons said, and she blinked in surprise. I want to sell it, and Mr. Hollister wants to buy it. For a moment, the words did not make sense. Elena looked from Simmons to James, confusion written clearly on her face. I do not understand. James stepped forward, and there was something almost tentative in his posture, as if he were approaching a skittish horse. I told you yesterday that I wanted to help, he said. I rode into town, talked to Simmons, and learned that the bank is willing to sell this plot for $200. It is a fair price for land this size, especially with water access, so I bought it. Elena's head was spinning. You bought the land? Yes, James said simply, and I want to give it to you. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Give it to me? James reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded document. This is the deed, he said, holding it out to her. It transfers ownership of this land from me to you, all legal, all proper. If you sign it, this land will be yours. You can plant your garden, build a house if you want, do whatever you see fit. No lease, no rent, no strings. It is yours. Elena could not move. She stood frozen, staring at the paper in James's hand, as if it might bite her. I do not understand, she whispered. Why would you do this? Because you need it, James said. His voice was quiet, but firm. Because you are working yourself to exhaustion trying to survive, and you should not have to. Because this land is just sitting here doing nothing, and you can make it into something good. Because it is the right thing to do. I cannot accept this, Elena said, even as every fiber of her being screamed at her to take the paper, to sign it, to secure this miracle before it evaporated. It is too much. I cannot take such a gift from a stranger. Then consider it not a gift but an investment, James said. You are going to grow vegetables here, sell them in town. That will be good for everyone. More fresh produce, more commerce, more opportunity. I am just providing the means for you to do what you were already going to do anyway. Simmons cleared his throat. For what it is worth, Mrs. Morales, the transaction is already complete. Mr. Hollister has purchased the land from the bank. Whether you accept the deed from him or not is between the two of you. But as far as the bank is concerned, this property is no longer ours. Elena looked at the deed again, at James's outstretched hand holding it. She thought of the weeks of hunger she had endured, the nights she had lain awake wondering where she would go when the landlady finally evicted her, the desperate calculations of how she might survive another month, another week, another day. She thought of Miguel, who had always told her to be proud, to never take charity, to stand on her own. But Miguel was dead and she was alive, and sometimes survival meant accepting help even when your pride screamed against it. Why? She asked again, and this time her voice broke on the word. Please, I need to understand. Why would you spend $200 on a stranger? What do you want from me? James lowered the deed slightly, and his expression was so gentle it made her chest ache. I want nothing from you, Mrs. Morales. I want you to have this land so you can stop walking 10 miles a day, so you can build something sustainable, so you can have a chance at a real life. That is all. I swear to you, that is all. Tears were burning in Elena's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of these men, would not show that much vulnerability, but her hands shook as she reached out and took the deed from James. And when her fingers brushed his, she felt a shock run through her like touching a live wire. She pulled back quickly, clutching the paper to her chest. "I will pay you back," she said, her voice fierce despite its shaking. "Every penny. I do not know how long it will take, but I will pay you back every cent of what you spent." "That is not necessary," James started, but Elena cut him off. "It is necessary to me," she said. "I will not be in debt. I will pay you back." James looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If that is what you need to do, then all right, but there is no rush, no deadline. You pay me back when and if you can, and if you cannot. That is fine too." Simmons stepped forward, pulling another paper from his coat. "Mrs. Morales, this is your copy of the transaction. It confirms your ownership of this plot, describes the boundaries, and registers your claim with the county. You will need to keep it safe, and you will need to sign here and here to finalize the transfer." He produced a pen and ink, and Elena signed where he indicated, her hand surprisingly steady despite everything. Her married name looked strange on the official document, the formal script turning Elena Morales into something important, something legal. When it was done, Simmons blotted the ink carefully, folded the papers, and handed her one copy. "Congratulations, Mrs. Morales," he said. "You are now a landowner." The words seemed impossible, absurd. She had gone to sleep last night in a rented room she could barely afford, desperate and alone. Now she owned land, nearly 3 acres of good bottomland with water access and rich soil. It was more than Miguel had ever been able to give her, more than she had dreamed of having, and it had come from a stranger's inexplicable kindness. Simmons mounted his horse, tipped his hat to both of them, and rode off back toward town. That left Elena alone with James Hollister in a silence that felt enormous. She clutched the deed in both hands, afraid to let it go, afraid it might disappear if she did not hold on tight enough. "Thank you," she said finally, the words completely inadequate for what she felt. "I do not know how to thank you for this." "You do not need to thank me," James said. He was looking at her garden again, at the rose she had planted. "You did all the hard work yourself. I just made it so you could keep doing it." Elena followed his gaze, seeing her plot with new eyes now. It was not someone else's land she was borrowing, not a temporary solution to an impossible problem. It was hers. She could build something here, something lasting. The enormity of it was almost too much to bear. "I should get back to town," James said after a moment. "I have work to do at the ranch. But Mrs. Morales, if you need anything, my property is just 3 miles west, like I said. You will see the gate, a double post with a crossbeam and a burned brand that says Double H. You are welcome there any time." "Thank you," Elena said again. She wanted to say more, wanted to find words that could convey what this meant, but her throat was too tight and her eyes too full of tears she refused to shed. James mounted his horse, then paused, looking down at her. "You're going to do well here," he said. "I can see it already. You have the determination and the knowledge and the will. This land is lucky to have you." Then he rode away, and Elena stood alone in her garden holding the deed to her land, and finally let the tears come. She sank down right there in the dirt, the paper pressed to her chest, and cried with relief and gratitude and exhaustion and hope all tangled together. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she wiped her face, stood up, and went back to planting her peppers. The work steadied her, gave her something to focus on beyond the wild swirl of her emotions. By the time the sun reached its zenith, she had finished all the rows, and every seed she owned was in the ground. Over the following weeks, Elena fell into a new rhythm. She still walked from town each morning, but now it was to her own land, and that made every step feel different. She carried more tools, having spent some of her precious remaining money on a hoe and a better shovel. She built a small lean-to from scrap wood near the creek, just enough to give her shade during the hottest part of the day, and a place to store her tools so she did not have to carry them back and forth. She hauled water from the creek in a borrowed bucket, ensuring her plants got enough moisture beyond what the rain provided. The seeds sprouted. First the beans pushed through, pale green shoots uncurling toward the sun, then the tomatoes, the squash, the corn. The peppers were slower, but eventually they too emerged. Elena tended them with fierce devotion, pulling weeds, checking for pests, making sure each plant had what it needed. When she saw the first true leaves appearing, she felt a surge of pride so strong it was almost painful. She saw James Hollister twice during those weeks, both times from a distance. He was riding his property, checking fences or moving cattle, and he would lift a hand in greeting when he spotted her. She would wave back, grateful that he did not approach, did not intrude on her work. She was not ready yet to face him directly, not with the weight of her debt and her gratitude pressing on her chest like a stone. But she thought about him often. She thought about the way he had looked at her garden, the respect in his eyes when he acknowledged her hard work. She thought about his quiet voice and his steady gaze, and the way he had asked for nothing in return for his incredible generosity. She thought about his mother, widowed and struggling, and wondered if that was why he had helped her, or if there was something more. At night, lying in her rented room, she would pull out the deed and read it by candlelight. The legal language was formal and impersonal, but her name was there in black ink, marking her as the owner. It still felt like a dream, something too good to be real. She kept waiting for someone to tell her there had been a mistake, that the land was not really hers, that she had to give it back. But the weeks passed, and no one came, and her plants grew taller and stronger. When the first beans were ready to harvest, Elena picked them with hands that trembled slightly. She filled a basket, the pods crisp and perfect, and carried them to the market in San Antonio. They sold within an hour, and she returned to her room with coins in her pocket and a lightness in her chest she had not felt since Miguel died. She had grown something and sold it, and earned money through her own labor. It was the beginning she had dreamed of. The money was not much, but it was enough to pay her rent for another week and buy a few supplies. Elena kept careful account of every penny she earned and every penny she spent. She had a long way to go before she could pay back James's $200, but she would do it. She had promised herself that, and Elena Morales kept her promises. As spring turned towards summer, the garden flourished. Elena's tomatoes grew heavy with fruit. Her squash vines spread across the ground in a tangle of leaves and blooms. Her corn stalks reached toward the sky. She was at her land every single day now, from dawn until the heat became unbearable, then back again in the evening when things cooled. She had started sleeping at the lean-to sometimes, too tired to make the walk back to town, curling up on a blanket beneath the stars with the sound of the creek as her lullaby. It was on one of those evenings, when the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, that James Hollister rode up to her land again. Elena was sitting by the creek, soaking her aching feet in the cool water when she heard his horse. She scrambled up, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look, her dress stained with dirt, her hair falling loose from its braid. "Mrs. Morales," James called, swinging down from his saddle. "I hope I am not intruding?" "No," Elena said, wiping her wet feet hastily on the grass and shoving them back into her worn boots. "You are not intruding. This is your land, after all." "It is your land," James corrected gently. He walked toward her, leading his horse. In the golden light of sunset, he looked different, softer somehow. "I was riding back from town and thought I would check on how things are growing." Elena gestured toward the garden, which was lush and green in the evening light. "See for yourself." James walked along the rows, examining the plants with the eye of someone who knew farming. He crouched down beside a tomato plant heavy with fruit, ran his hand over a squash vine thick with blossoms, stood in the corn looking up at the stalks that now reached well past his waist. When he came back to where Elena stood, his expression was one of open admiration. "This is remarkable," he said. "I knew you would do well, but this is beyond what I expected. You have a gift for growing things." Elena felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the sun. "Thank you. The land is good, and we have had good rain." "The land is good, But land does not tend itself, James said. This is your doing. He paused, then added, I heard in town that you have been selling at the market. People are talking about your vegetables, saying they are the best to be had. I have sold some, Elena acknowledged. She did not mention how much or how often, did not want him to know she was keeping careful track so she could pay him back. It felt too much like admitting the depth of her gratitude, and she was not ready for that. It is going well enough. James nodded, then glanced toward the lean-to. Are you staying out here at night? Sometimes, Elena said. When I work late and am too tired to walk back, it is safe enough. Something flickered in James's eyes, something that might have been concern. You are alone out here, he said. That worries me. I have been alone since my husband died, Elena said more sharply than she intended. I have managed so far. I do not doubt your ability to manage, James said quietly. But there are dangers out here beyond your control. Snakes, coyotes, men with bad intentions. It would give me peace of mind to know you had better shelter. I cannot afford better shelter, Elena said flatly. This lean-to is enough. James was quiet for a moment, looking at her with that steady gaze that seemed to see more than she wanted to show. Mrs. Morales, I am going to speak plainly, if you will permit me. My ranch has an old cabin on it, about half a mile from my main house. It was built by the original homesteader and has not been used in years, but it is sound. 4 walls, a roof, a fireplace, a door that locks. It needs cleaning and some minor repairs, but it is livable. You are welcome to stay there if you want. It would be much closer to your land than town, and much safer than a lean-to. Elena stared at him. You want me to live in a cabin on your property? I want you to have a safe place to sleep, James corrected. The cabin is just sitting there empty. You would be doing me a favor by occupying it, keeping it from falling to pieces entirely, and it would save you the walk to and from town every day. I cannot pay you rent, Elena said immediately. I am already in debt to you for the land. I will not increase that debt. No rent, James said. Consider it part of being neighbors. You need a place to stay. I have a place sitting empty. It is practical, nothing more. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain the careful distance between them. But the truth was that the lean-to was miserable, offering scant protection from the elements and none at all from animals or people. And the walk to and from town was exhausting, eating up hours she could be spending on her garden. If she could stay close to her land, she could accomplish so much more. I would want to see this cabin first, she said finally, before I agree to anything. Of course, James said. Would you like to see it now? We have perhaps an hour before full dark. Elena hesitated, then nodded. She was already dusty and tired. What difference would another hour make? She pulled on the boots she had been drying and followed James to his horse. He mounted, then reached down to help her up behind him. Elena grasped his hand, feeling again that strange shock when their skin touched, and let him pull her up to sit sideways behind the saddle. She had to put one arm around his waist to steady herself, and even through his shirt she could feel the warmth of him, the solid strength. They rode in silence across the open land, the horse moving at a smooth walk. Elena tried not to think about how close they were, how intimate this felt, his back against her side, his movements guiding the horse beneath them. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, watching the sky fade from gold to purple as the sun slipped lower. The Double H ranch house came into view after about 15 minutes, a solid structure of wood and stone with a wide porch and corrals out back. James rode past it, following a faint track that led through a grove of live oaks. Beyond the trees, set in a small clearing, stood a cabin. It was small, perhaps 1 room, but it was made of good logs and had a stone chimney and real glass in the windows. The door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, and the whole structure had the air of neglect, but it was solid. James dismounted and helped Elena down, then led her to the door. It opened with a creak that suggested the hinges needed oil. Inside, the cabin was dim and dusty, but Elena could see the bones of it were good. 1 large room with a fireplace on 1 wall, a window on each of the other 3 walls to let in light and air. A loft above, accessible by a ladder, probably for sleeping. The floor was wood, dirty but intact. The corners held old leaves and debris that had blown in through cracks. "It needs a good cleaning," James said, standing in the doorway, "and the fireplace should be checked, make sure the chimney is not blocked. But the roof is sound. I checked it last winter. No leaks." Elena walked through the space, imagining it cleaned and swept, imagining a bed in that corner, a table by the window, imagining herself here, in this place, with 4 walls around her and a door she could lock. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked, turning to face James. He was silhouetted in the doorway, the last of the sunset behind him. "First the land, now this. What do you want from me?" James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. "I want nothing from you, Mrs. Morales, but if I am being completely honest, I will admit that I find myself thinking about you often. I think about how hard you work, how determined you are, how you refuse to give up even when everything is stacked against you. I admire that. And I want to help because seeing you succeed would make me happy. That is all. I promise you, that is all." Elena searched his face in the growing darkness, looking for deception, for hidden motives. But she saw only sincerity and something else, something warmer that made her heart beat faster. "I will clean this cabin and stay here," she said carefully, "but only if you let me do something in return. I will cook for you. Meals that you can take back to your ranch or eat there if you prefer. I am a good cook, and you have been generous. It is the least I can do." James hesitated, and Elena could see him weighing whether to refuse. But finally he nodded. "All right. If it makes you feel better about accepting help, then I will accept your offer. I confess my own cooking leaves much to be desired." Something like relief washed through Elena, easing the tension she had been carrying. Cooking for him was something she could do, something that felt like payment rather than charity. It made the whole arrangement more bearable. "Then we have an agreement," she said. They rode back to her garden in the deepening twilight. James helped her gather her few belongings from the lean-to, then rode her back to the cabin. He lit a lantern he had brought from his main house, giving her light to see by, and promised to bring cleaning supplies in the morning. Then he rode away into the darkness, leaving Elena alone in her new home. She stood in the middle of the empty cabin, lantern in hand, and felt something shift inside her. For the first time since Miguel died, she had a place that was hers. A roof over her head that was not grudgingly rented, but freely given. She had land to farm, work to do, and a future that held possibility instead of just desperation. And she had James Hollister, a man whose kindness confused and frightened her in equal measure, but whose presence had become something she looked forward to. Elena set the lantern on the floor and sat down beside it, her back against the wall. She was too tired to walk back to town tonight, too tired to do anything but sit here and breathe and let the reality of her situation sink in. She owned land. She had shelter. She had the means to survive and maybe, just maybe, the means to build something more. Outside, the night sounds of the ranch settled around her. Cattle lowing in the distance, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through the oak trees. It should have felt strange, sleeping in an unfamiliar place, but instead it felt right. It felt like coming home. The next morning, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the dusty windows and the sound of someone hammering. She scrambled to her feet, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. She pushed open the cabin door to find James on the porch, repairing the crooked hinge. A pile of supplies sat beside him. A broom, rags, a bucket, soap, oil for the wood. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile. "I hope I did not wake you." "I should have been up an hour ago," Elena said, mortified to have been caught sleeping when there was work to be done. "I did not mean to be lazy." "You were exhausted," James said. "There is no shame in sleeping when your body needs it, and it is barely past dawn. You have not missed much." He finished tightening the hinge and tested the door. It swung smoothly now, no longer sagging. There, that should hold. Elena looked at the supplies, then at James. He was dressed for work, his sleeves rolled up, and there was something different about him this morning, an easiness that had not been there before. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I wanted to," James replied. "Besides, I have a vested interest in making sure this cabin is livable. You promised to cook for me, remember? I cannot have my future meals coming from a place that is falling apart." There was humor in his voice, and Elena found herself almost smiling. "I should start cleaning then." "I will help," James said. "Many hands make light work." Elena wanted to protest, wanted to maintain her independence, but the cabin was filthy and the task was daunting. "All right," she said, "thank you." They worked together through the morning, sweeping out the debris, scrubbing the floors and walls, checking the fireplace and chimney. James climbed up to the loft and pronounced it sound, if dusty, and Elena swept it clean. They found a pack rat nest in one corner and evicted its inhabitants. They oiled the door hinges and the window latches. James rode back to his house and returned with an old bed frame and a straw mattress, which they hauled up to the loft. By midday, the cabin was transformed. Clean, aired out, smelling of soap and fresh air instead of dust and neglect. Elena stood in the middle of it, looking around with something like wonder. It was not fancy, but it was clean and solid and hers to use. "I brought lunch," James said, producing a cloth-wrapped bundle from his saddlebag. "Nothing fancy, just bread and cheese and some dried beef. But I thought you might be hungry." They sat on the porch steps and ate, the food tasting better than it had any right to because Elena had not realized how hungry she was. They did not talk much, just sat in comfortable silence, watching the cattle grazing in the distance. "I should get to my garden," Elena said when they were finished. "I have already lost most of the day." "I need to get back to my own work as well," James said. "But Elena—" He paused, and she realized it was the first time he had used her given name. "I am glad you are here. I'm glad the cabin will be used." "Thank you," Elena said, "for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I do not know what else to say. You have given me more than I can ever repay." "You do not need to repay anything," James said, but he was smiling. "Though I'm looking forward to those meals you promised." Elena felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that was not quite gratitude and not quite attraction, but somewhere in between. "I will bring dinner to your house tonight," she said, "if that is acceptable." "That would be more than acceptable," James said. "That would be wonderful." He rode away, and Elena walked the short distance to her garden. Her plants were thriving, and she spent the afternoon weeding and watering, her mind only half on the work. The other half was thinking about James Hollister, about the way he smiled, the way he looked at her, the way he had rolled up his sleeves and helped her clean without a hint of condescension. Miguel had been a good man, but he had also been proud, unwilling to do what he considered women's work. James seemed to have no such compunctions. That evening, Elena cooked at the cabin's fireplace, making a simple but hearty meal of beans and rice with peppers from her garden and some beef James had left for her. She carried it to his house in a covered pot, feeling nervous in a way that was unfamiliar. This was not just gratitude anymore, she was starting to realize. This was something more complicated. James's ranch house was larger inside than it had looked from outside. A big main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a couple of doors that probably led to bedrooms. It was clean but sparse, the home of a man who lived alone and did not see the need for decoration. James greeted her at the door, his face lighting up when he saw the pot in her hands. "That smells amazing," he said. "Come in, please." They ate at his kitchen table, and Elena watched him take his first bite with a mixture of pride and nervousness. But his expression when he tasted her cooking was worth any anxiety. He closed his eyes and made a sound of pure appreciation. "This is delicious," he said, "better even than those tamales you sold at the market." "It is just beans and rice," Elena demurred, but she could not quite hide her smile. They talked while they ate, cautious at first, then with growing ease. James told her about his ranch, about the cattle business, about the challenges of keeping everything running with limited help. Elena told him about her garden, about her plans to expand next year if this season went well, about the varieties of vegetables she wanted to try. They did not talk about Miguel or about James's father or about the circumstances that had brought them together. Those subjects felt too heavy for the moment, too fraught. When the meal was finished, Elena cleaned the dishes over James's protests. "You cooked," he said. "I should clean." "You have done enough work today," Elena said firmly. "Let me do this." She washed and dried the dishes, aware of James watching her from the table, and when she was done, he walked her back to the cabin. The sun had set, but the moon was bright enough to see by. They walked slowly, neither seeming in a hurry to end the evening. At the cabin door, James paused. "Elena," he said, and again the sound of her name in his voice made something flutter in her chest. "May I ask you something?" "Yes," she said. "Do you think you might be happy here? On this land, in this place?" Elena considered the question seriously. "I think I might," she said finally. "I think I'm already happier than I have been in a long time. Even with all the work, even with all the uncertainty, there is something about this place that feels right." James smiled, and in the moonlight his eyes looked almost silver. "I am glad," he said. "You deserve happiness, Elena. You deserve good things." He left then, walking back toward his house, and Elena went inside her cabin and closed the door. She climbed up to the loft and lay down on the mattress James had brought, and she found herself smiling into the darkness. Tomorrow she would work in her garden. Tomorrow she would cook another meal. Tomorrow she would see James again. The thought filled her with something that felt dangerously like anticipation, like hope. The days turned into weeks, and a pattern established itself. Elena worked her garden during the long daylight hours, tending her plants, harvesting what was ready, taking her produce to market twice a week. She cooked for James every evening, bringing meals to his house or inviting him to eat at the cabin. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from practical matters of farming and ranching to deeper things, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Elena learned that James had taken over his family's ranch when he was 20, after his mother remarried and moved east with his younger siblings. He had been running it alone for 6 years, building it from a struggling operation into something successful. He was lonely, she realized, though he never said it directly. He had hands who worked for him, neighbors he traded with, but no one close, no one he could really talk to. She learned that he had been engaged once to a girl from San Antonio whose family owned a mercantile. But she had broken it off, saying she could not bear the isolation of ranch life, the endless work, and the loneliness. James spoke of it matter-of-factly, without bitterness, but Elena could hear the hurt beneath his words. In turn, Elena told him about Miguel, about their courtship and marriage, about the dreams they had shared and the reality that had been so much harder. She told him about Miguel's death, about the terror of finding herself alone and penniless. She did not cry when she talked about it, but James listened with such compassion that it made her throat tight. "You loved him very much," James observed one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "I did," Elena said. "But I'm starting to understand that loving someone and being able to survive alone are two different things. Miguel was a good man, but he was not practical. He always thought things would work out somehow, that we would find a way. And maybe we would have if he had lived, but he did not, and I had to find my own way." "You did find it," James said quietly. "You're finding it still. That takes courage." Elena looked at him, at the way the fading light cast shadows across his face. "You made it possible," she said. "I would not have any of this without you." "You would have found another way," James said. "You are too determined not to." But Elena was not so sure. She thought if James had not come along, she might have starved or been forced into something desperate. She owed him her life, really, though she could not quite bring herself to say it. As summer deepened, Elena's garden produced abundantly. She sold tomatoes and peppers and squash and beans, making more money than she had dared hope for. She kept meticulous records tallying every penny she earned against the $200 she owed James. At the rate she was going, she calculated she could pay him back in 2 years, maybe less if next season was as good as this one. She also noticed that she thought about Miguel less and less. She still wore his ring, still honored his memory, but the grief that had been so sharp and immediate had dulled into something softer, something she could live with. And in its place, other feelings were growing. Feelings that centered around James Hollister and the way her heart beat faster when she saw him, the way she looked forward to their evenings together, the way she caught herself watching him when he was not looking. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural result of spending so much time with someone who had been so kind, but she knew better. She was falling in love with James, had perhaps been falling since that first morning when he rode up to her garden and looked at her with respect instead of pity. It terrified her. She had barely survived losing Miguel. She was not sure she could survive losing someone else. But James seemed to feel something too. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression soft and wondering. He found excuses to touch her, brushing her hand when he passed her something, steadying her elbow when they walked on uneven ground, his fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. He smiled more when she was around, laughed more readily. He told her once that the ranch felt less lonely now, and she knew he meant because of her. The moment it changed was an evening in late July. Elena had cooked chicken with tomatoes and peppers, and they had eaten on James's porch, enjoying the slightly cooler evening air. After dinner, they walked down to the creek that ran through his property, the same creek that bordered Elena's garden. The moon was full, turning the water into a ribbon of silver. They stood on the bank, watching the current, not quite touching but close enough that Elena could feel the heat of James's body beside hers. Finally, James spoke, his voice low and tentative. "Elena, I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about this for weeks, trying to decide if I should say anything, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer." He turned to face her, and in the moonlight his eyes were intense. "I have feelings for you, not just friendship, not just neighborly concern. Real feelings. The kind that keep me awake at night and make me look for excuses to see you. The kind that make me want things I have no right to want." Elena's breath caught. "James." "I know it is too soon," he continued, the words rushing out now as if he had been holding them back for too long. "I know you are still grieving your husband, still finding your way. I know I have no right to say any of this, but I cannot pretend anymore. I cannot keep acting like you are just my neighbor, just someone I am helping. You are so much more than that to me. You are everything." Elena stared at him, her mind racing. She should tell him it was too soon, that she was not ready, that she could not do this. But the words that came out instead were, "You are everything to me too." James's expression transformed, hope and joy flooding his face. "Elena, do you mean that?" "I have been trying not to feel it," she whispered. "I have been telling myself it is just gratitude, just loneliness. But it is not. I think about you all the time. I look forward to seeing you more than anything else in my day. When I cook, I think about what you might like. When I work in my garden, I imagine telling you about it. You have become the center of my world, and it scares me because I have already lost so much." "You will not lose me," James said fiercely. He reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Elena, I am not going anywhere. I am not sick. I am not reckless. I am right here, and I want to stay right here with you for as long as you will have me." "I do not know how to do this," Elena said, her voice shaking. "I do not know how to love someone again." "We will figure it out together," James said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, the gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. We do not have to rush. We can take all the time you need. I just needed you to know how I feel, needed you to know that you are not alone in this." Elena stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. She raised her free hand and placed it on his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palm. "Kiss me," she said. "Please, James, kiss me." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle, and lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he were afraid she might pull away. But Elena pressed closer, her arms going around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate, and full of all the longing they had both been suppressing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I have wanted you to," Elena said. They stood there in the moonlight holding each other, and Elena felt something inside her heal. She was not betraying Miguel's memory by loving again. She was honoring it by choosing to live, by choosing to open her heart to someone new. Miguel would have wanted her to be happy. She believed that with her whole soul. From that night on, things between them shifted. They were no longer just neighbors, no longer just friends. They were courting, in the old-fashioned sense, taking their time to build something real. James was patient and respectful, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. But they held hands when they walked, kissed goodnight when he left her at the cabin, spent hours talking about the future they might build together. Elena met James's ranch hands, good men who treated her with easy courtesy. They knew she realized that she was important to their boss, and they respected that. She cooked for them sometimes, big pots of stew or pans of cornbread, and they thanked her with genuine warmth. In August, James asked her to marry him. They were in her garden harvesting tomatoes in the early morning before the heat became oppressive. He set down his basket, took both her hands, and said simply, "Elena, will you be my wife?" Elena looked at him, this man who had given her everything, who had seen her at her lowest, and never once made her feel small. "Yes," she said, "yes, I will marry you." They were married in September in a small ceremony at the church in San Antonio. Elena wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and James wore a new suit. His ranch hands attended, along with a few neighbors and the people Elena had gotten to know at the market. It was nothing fancy, but it was perfect. Their wedding night was spent at the cabin, which now felt like theirs instead of just hers. James was tender and careful, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted this. And Elena, who had been intimate with only one man before, found that loving James felt both familiar and entirely new. He was different from Miguel, more confident, more attuned to her needs. When she cried afterward, he held her and asked if he had hurt her, but she shook her head. "I am just happy," she said, "so impossibly happy." They decided to build a new house, something bigger than the cabin or James's bachelor ranch house, something that could hold a family. James hired carpenters, and over the fall and winter, a beautiful house took shape on a rise overlooking Elena's garden. It had 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Elena planted flowers in the yard, roses and hollyhocks and zinnias. She hung curtains in the windows and filled the rooms with furniture they picked out together. When spring came again, Elena planted her garden with renewed energy. This time she had help. With James and his hands pitching in during the busiest times, she expanded her operation, planting 3 times as much as the year before. She sold her vegetables at the market, and she canned and preserved, filling their cellar with jars of tomatoes and pickles and jams. In July, Elena realized she was pregnant. She told James over dinner one evening, watching his face transform from puzzlement to understanding to pure joy. He jumped up from the table, swept her into his arms, and spun her around until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Elena, we are going to have a baby." Their son was born in March of 1880, a healthy boy with dark hair and his father's blue-green eyes. They named him Miguel James, honoring both the past and the present. Elena held him and cried, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. She had lost so much, but she had gained so much more. She had a husband who adored her, a son who was perfect, a home that was truly hers, and land that fed not just her body but her soul. James was a devoted father, carrying baby Miguel around the ranch, talking to him about cattle and horses and growing things. Elena watched them together and felt her heart swell. She had built a life from nothing, from desperation and borrowed land and a stranger's kindness. And it was a good life, better than she had ever dreamed possible. Over the years that followed, their family grew. A daughter named Rosa was born 2 years after Miguel, then another son they called William, then twin girls Anna and Maria. The house filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of children. Elena's garden expanded to feed them all, and she taught her children to tend it, passing on the knowledge and love of growing things that had saved her life. James's ranch prospered, and he bought more land, expanding until the Double H was one of the most successful operations in the area. But he never forgot where they had started, never lost his appreciation for how far they had come. He would sometimes take Elena out to the original plot, the 3 acres where she had first planted her garden, and they would stand there remembering. "I was planting a garden on land that was not mine," Elena said once, standing in that place with James's arm around her. Their children were playing nearby, Miguel teaching Rosa how to pull weeds. "I was desperate and alone and terrified." "And I bought the land and gave you the deed," James said, pulling her closer. "Best $200 I ever spent." Elena turned in his arms, looking up at him. She was 37 years old now, with silver threads in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of working in the sun. James was 40, his face weathered and strong. They had been married for over a decade, had built a life together, had weathered storms both literal and figurative, and she loved him more with each passing year. "You gave me everything," she said, "not just the land. Everything, a home, a family, a future. I do not think you understand how much that means." "I understand," James said softly, "because you gave me everything too. You gave me love and partnership and a family. You made this ranch into a home. You made my life worth living. We saved each other, Elena. That is the truth of it." She kissed him there in the garden with their children playing around them and the sun warm on their shoulders. She thought about the girl she had been, desperately turning over earth that was not hers, betting everything on seeds and hope. That girl had been brave and resourceful and determined, but she had also been alone and frightened and running out of options. Now Elena was none of those things. She was a wife, a mother, a landowner, a businesswoman. She had a husband who loved her as an equal partner, who valued her work and her opinions. She had children who were healthy and happy and surrounded by love. She had land that was legally and completely hers, land that fed them and sustained them and connected them to something larger than themselves. The garden had saved her, but James had given her the chance to grow it, and in doing so had given her a chance at life itself. She would never forget that. She would never take it for granted. Every morning when she walked out to tend her plants, every evening when she cooked dinner for her family, every night when she lay in James's arms, she remembered how close she had come to losing everything, and she was grateful. As their children grew, Elena and James made sure to teach them about hard work, about kindness, about helping those in need. They donated vegetables to families in town who could not afford them. They hired people who were down on their luck, giving them a chance to prove themselves. They remembered what it was like to struggle, and they tried to ease that struggle for others when they could. Miguel, their eldest, grew into a thoughtful young man who loved the ranch and wanted to run it someday. Rosa was fascinated by her mother's garden and learned everything she could about growing things. William was the adventurous one, always exploring, always asking questions. The twins, Anna and Maria, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Elena looked at them and saw the future, saw generations that would come after, built on the foundation she and James had laid. One evening, when their children were older and the house was temporarily quiet, James and Elena sat on their porch watching the sunset. It was late summer, and the air was heavy with the scent of ripening fruit and hay. Elena leaned against James's shoulder, his arm around her, and felt completely content. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" James asked. "If I had not ridden past your garden that day, if I had not stopped?" "I think about it sometimes," Elena admitted. "I do not like to dwell on it because it frightens me. I do not know what would have happened to me. Nothing good, I suspect." "I would have found you somehow," James said. "I like to think fate would have brought us together no matter what. We were meant to be, Elena." "I believe that." Elena tilted her head to look at him. "Do you really believe in fate?" "I believe in us," James said. "I believe that some things are meant to happen, that some people are meant to find each other. You needed help, and I needed purpose. You needed land, and I had the means to give it to you, but more than that, you needed love, and I needed someone to love. We fit together, Elena. We always have." She kissed him, a soft press of lips that held years of love and trust and partnership. "We do fit together," she agreed. "Better than I ever thought possible." As darkness fell, they went inside to their family, to the dinner table where their children waited, to the life they had built together. And Elena thought, not for the first time, that she was the luckiest woman in the world. She had lost everything once, had found herself alone and desperate in a harsh world, but she had survived, had fought, had taken a chance on planting a garden on land that was not hers, and a cowboy had bought that land and given her the deed. But more importantly, he had given her his heart, his name, his future. He had seen her not as a charity case or a burden, but as a woman worth loving, worth building a life with, and together they had created something beautiful. Years later, when Elena was an old woman and James's hair had gone completely white, they would still walk out to that original plot of land. It was part of the ranch now, officially incorporated, but Elena still tended a garden there. Not for income anymore, but for joy, for the simple pleasure of putting seeds in soil and watching them grow. Their grandchildren would sometimes work alongside her, and Elena would tell them the story of how she had come to this land, desperate and alone. She would tell them about the day a cowboy rode up and changed her life forever. She would tell them that sometimes when everything seems lost, help comes from unexpected places. And that kindness, real kindness with no strings attached, can change the world. James would stand at the edge of the garden watching her with those blue-green eyes that had barely faded with age, and Elena would feel the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time he kissed her. Love, she had learned, did not diminish with time. It grew deeper, stronger, more complex. It became woven into the fabric of your life until you could not imagine existing without it. On a warm spring day in 1920, 42 years after she had first started planting her garden, Elena stood in that same spot with James beside her. They were old now, their children grown with children of their own, the ranch being run by Miguel with help from his siblings. But they still came here, to this place where everything had begun. "I was thinking," James said, his voice still strong despite his age, "that we should have something put here, a marker of some kind, to remember." "Remember what?" Elena asked. "The day I met you," James said. "The day our life together started. This place is important. It should be marked." Elena thought about it, then nodded. "A stone, maybe, something simple. It does not need words. Anyone who knows us will understand." So they had a stone placed there, a simple granite marker that stood at the edge of what had once been Elena's first garden row. No words were carved into it, no dates or names. It was just a stone, marking a place where something important had happened, where two lives had intersected and changed each other forever. When Elena passed away in her sleep at the age of 89, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, James held her hand until the very end. He followed her 6 months later, his heart simply giving out one morning as he stood looking out at the land they had built together. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the original garden plot. Their descendants kept the ranch running, kept the garden growing, kept the stone marker in place. The story of Elena and James became part of family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The desperate widow who planted a garden on land that was not hers, the lonely cowboy who bought that land and gave her the deed, asking nothing in return. The love that grew between them, strong and true and lasting. It was a story about survival and kindness and second chances. It was a story about taking risks and trusting strangers and believing in the possibility of something better. It was a story about love, the kind that transforms lives and builds legacies. And it was all true, every word of it, from that first morning when Elena pushed her shovel into earth she did not own, to the last evening when she fell asleep for the final time with James's weathered hand in hers. The land remembered. The soil that had nurtured Elena's first desperate plants now fed the gardens and crops of her great-great-grandchildren. The creek still flowed past, its water still sweet and cold. The cabin where Elena and James had first lived was preserved, maintained as a reminder of humble beginnings, and the stone marker stood silent, marking the place where everything changed. Because sometimes when you are at your lowest, when you have nothing left but determination and hope, the world surprises you. Sometimes a stranger rides by and sees not what you lack, but what you are capable of. Sometimes kindness is real and comes without conditions. Sometimes love finds you when you're not even looking for it, and it changes everything. Elena Morales had planted a garden on land that was not hers, betting everything on seeds and sweat and hope. James Hollister had bought that land and given her the deed, asking nothing in return but her happiness. And from those simple actions, from that moment of desperate need meeting unexpected generosity, had grown a love story for the ages, a family that spanned generations, a legacy that would never be forgotten. The garden still grew, the stone still stood, and the story lived on. Testament to the transformative power of kindness, courage, and love. It was a story that began with a woman alone, planting hope in borrowed ground, and it ended with generations of family, with land that would never be lost, with love that transcended time itself. It was the story of Elena and James, the widow and the cowboy, and it was beautiful from beginning to end.